Hi, welcome to Access. I'm Nicole.
I'm Ken.
We're doing Esther today.
Esther!
Most happening chick in the Bible.
That's right. Oh, that's right. I'm doing authorship
Yes.
of Esther. There's really nothing to say about authorship. We have no idea. I think the reason the Christian Bible puts it where it does, which is after Ezra and Nehemiah, is that it happens in the Persian period.
Very clearly in the Persian period.
Very clearly in the Persian period. I think the most that we know in terms of authorship, and Nicole helped me out with this personally, is that it was probably written in Persia. So this is not a Palestinian book, and you're going to see that in some of the language it uses, the names it uses, and really some of the behavior where they're conspicuously not following food laws and dress laws. So it's an exotic book that takes place in the Winter Palace of modern day Iran?
I would think so.
Yeah. So in Susa. So what do you have words to add about the history?
Well, we know that it was set in the Jewish diaspora, so that's just during the exile. I don't think we've used the word diaspora, but it's one of those.
Yes, diaspora means to be like thoroughly seated.
Like dispersed.
Dispersed. That's right.
And we know that it was probably written between the 5th century and the 3rd century, but what we don't know is if it actually ever happened.
Yeah.
And people didn't really seem to care whether or not it happened. It kind of stands on its own as its own unit. You don't really need outside context to get what the story's about, which you do need for so many of the other books.
Yes. Yeah, this story stands on its own.
Yeah.
Very well.
And it seems to really have just been written on its own.
And it's written really well.
Really well. Yeah. Like, it's a cool story.
It has suspense, which is, I think, the first time in the Bible that you actually encounter a book which has literary devices like suspense and pairing, where Haman's hung on his own gallows. And, it's great.
It's lovely. It's well written. It's the Agatha Christie of the Old Testament. And the other interesting thing about this, which is another reason why we're pretty sure it's totally written on its own, is it doesn't mention God.
No, God does not show up. It's the rare book.
All kind of like the signature things about the Old Testament are not in here. You know, there's no mention of the exile. Of them really being in exile, but we know they are. And there's no mention of the return home.
The restoration.
The restoration.
And no God.
No God.
Written.
No Davidic kings.
Yeah.
Nothing. No Moses. Like, no Abraham. No, I think there might be a mention of Abraham in passing. But, yeah, all those hallmarks of Jewish literature, or what I would maybe call like Palestinian Jewish literature, are not there.
So it kind of stands out.
Stands out.
Yeah. It's a breath of fresh air you might be feeling.
Yeah, and maybe that's why the Christian organizers put it in the middle.
Give us a little relief.
Reroute and breathe.
And then Nicole was saying something earlier before we were taping that I found really interesting about kind of not the history of the book itself, but our own history.
History of reception?
Yeah, and how we hear this book. This is very interesting.
Yeah, so I mentioned in an earlier video that Esther is a hard book for me. I think I mentioned it when we were talking about Ruth.
Ruth, yeah.
Ruth is so much easier. Because with Esther, you can't not read it with post-Holocaust eyes, because it is dealing with the destruction of the Jewish people as a race. And I just don't think that anyone in an American context or European context, I don't want to speak for other contexts, can read it without automatically thinking Holocaust and all the atrocities. And I think we project kind of those Nazi ideas onto the players in this story in a lot of ways. Like King
Ahasuerus
becomes like a Hitler.
Yeah.
And Haman, his right-hand man, becomes one of those famous...
Goebbels.
A Goebbels, or like, becomes one of his SS top guys.
Well,
yeah. And we lose all historical perspective.
Yeah.
I think in a
That
lot
this
of ways.
happened a long time before.
A long time before, and that the actions that King Ahasuerus and Haman are taking are completely normal, completely standard, par for the course in the ancient world, and are actually a bit more generous than
what we just saw.
Than what we saw
in Nehemiah and Ezra.
Right,
That's what. Yeah.
But even more generous than other kingdoms, because if you compare like how they're acting in the Persian Empire versus like Alexander the Great in the Greek, who is right after these guys, Alexander's way worse.
Actually, I'm going to argue with that.
Okay.
I think he's great. They intermarry and they share God. It's a happening party time. But anyway, no, that's another tape. That's another discussion for another day.
Yeah, but it's like, because we're so sensitive to these kind of issues, and again, it is the Jews, we only read it through that way. And the other thing I noticed from studying this when I was in high school, which was in the 90s, versus studying it now, we read it also with kind of a Bush perspective. And I would say this for both very conservative Bible studies, but then also very liberal, because I've done Esther in both. And you see the king is kind of aloof and kind of dumb. And then his henchman is takes everything personally, is kind of creating wars for his own agenda, and taking out personal vendettas.
And he carries around a shotgun. It's very curious.
It's very weird, and shoots his friends
book.
in the face. That you get this Bush Cheney weird vibe to it.
I'm just going to wave my little flag.
I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm not saying that's good or bad towards Bush and Cheney at all.
But it's a lens through which we see.
It's a lens through which it's now read. And hopefully that lens will go away in 10 years. But I think maybe we're all too close to that, whether you like it or not. Am I doing enough to couch like that for political views to not offend anyone?
Send complaints to Nicole Ryby and Ryby at
Trying to be polite. That you can't not read it with those lenses right now as well. So that's some interesting things about our own perception of reading it.
So we're going to focus in on some of the texts that we hope you know, but really this is one of those books that you can read the entire thing easily, quickly. It's a joy and a pleasure to do so. We're going to sort of, as a team, kind of tell the story. We haven't practiced this, so we'll see how it goes. But it starts off in the Winter Palace in Susa, which is this exotic locale for the Persian government. And King Ahasuerus has been getting his drink on, right? He is just like, we got.
It's basically a seasonal rave.
Yeah, it's a big party going on, and he does a stupid drunken thing. He has all of his courtiers around, he has all of his people around, and they say he is, the flagons are generous or something like that. And he says, hey, bring my Queen Vashti out so everybody can see